Hello, and welcome to episode number 198. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I am Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. There is an old project management saying that goes something like this: projects don't fail at the end. Projects fail at the beginning. But where exactly is the beginning? Is it scope definition? Is it the kickoff meeting? Is it the creation of the project charter? For Jamal Mustafayev, it is even earlier than that. A project starts at project selection, which is why he wrote a book about it called Delivering Exceptional Project Results, a practical guide to project selection, scoping, estimation, and management. In today's interview, we are going to take a look at project portfolio management, which is also part of his expertise, and how it helps companies to deliver these exceptional results. This episode is sponsored by the PDU Podcast, which is our sister podcast. It is a convenient way for you to earn unlimited PDUs. Get project management webinars delivered right to your portable player like an iPod or BlackBerry, and earn at least one PDU every month. With the PDU podcast, there is no need to go to a classroom. You don't even have to sit at home at your computer. Instead, enjoy the freedom of earning your PDUs anywhere. Simply download the webinars to your player and play them whenever and wherever you are. For instance, on your way to work. Your PDU podcast puts you on autopilot for your PMP or PGMP recertification. Visit pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Here is what Jamal wrote about his book on Amazon. I hope that after reading this book, junior project managers and technical team members will feel compelled to share it with their superiors so that these superiors can learn how to select projects properly and gain an understanding of the daily challenges faced by project managers. As always, when we have an author on the program to discuss his or her book, we are giving away 2 copies. One copy automatically goes to one lucky premium subscriber, and the other copy, well, that one is up for grabs. Please stop by at facebook.com/pmpodcast, that's our fan page, and look for the book giveaway notice. Jamal Mustafayev is president and founder of Think Tank Consulting, an internationally acclaimed expert and speaker in the areas of project portfolio management, scope definition, process improvement, and corporate training. He has done work for private sector companies and government organizations in Canada, the USA, Asia, and the Middle East. He is an author and a contributor to various project management publications and a frequent speaker at the key project management conferences. He holds a PMP certification, an MBA, and a BBA from Simon Fraser University, Vancouver, in Canada. And now, please share this podcast with your superiors. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview. Today with Jamal Mustafayev, author, speaker, and portfolio management expert.
Hello, Jamal. Welcome to the Project Management Podcast.
Hi, Cornelius. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. So we want to talk about your book, Delivering Exceptional Project Results, a practical guide to project selection, scoping, estimation, and management. But before we even go to that, what do you love about portfolio management? What made you write the book?
Well, I don't know if this is the love thing, but I can share some of the information that I share on the pages right at the beginning pages of my book, some statistical data that was gathered by researchers and scientists in the field of project and portfolio management. With your permission, I'll share it with you and your listeners. Well, it looks like most of the companies, if you look at the strategic level, i.e. project portfolio management level, which is the selection of the best projects for the company, Statistics look something like this. 84% of companies either do not conduct business cases for their projects or perform them on select key projects. 89% of companies rely solely on the financial data, which is notoriously unreliable. 84% of companies cannot adjust their budgets with their business needs, which constantly change because of the changing environments. To sum it up in one simple sentence, as one of my clients once told me, he goes, you know how projects initiated at our company? And I go, how? He goes, well, an executive just walks into the room and says, wouldn't it be really cool if we could do this? And bang, project initiated. If you take it a step down to the tactical side of things, at the project management level, and I think most of the listeners are familiar with those statistics, 19% of our projects fail outright. 46% are troubled, which means they're severely over the budget or severely late. If you take the first ingredients that we're not very good with selecting projects, and you take the second ingredients that, assuming even that good ideas were selected, we're not very good at delivery, we end up with 40% of project investments failing. If you extrapolate that to numbers, which is, in my opinion, like a higher impact data, 1.5 trillion in underperforming projects in US alone, and 5.2 trillion worldwide. Hence, I think portfolio management would provide you with solutions to these problems, and we obviously have problems.
Right. Okay, so we have a book about project management, and there are dozens, hundreds of similar books out there that discuss the same topic, maybe from a slightly different angle, maybe from another author, well, very likely from another author. What makes your book unique?
You know what? I had to go through the same process answering exactly the same question for JROS Publishing. When was that? About 3 years ago, when I was trying to convince them to pick up the book. And here's what I've discovered. And I've discovered it quite organically because I first had a question and I wanted to find an answer for that. And I started doing research and reading books about that. But here's what I've discovered. And I'm going to make some generalizations here. And whatever I'm saying is to the best of my knowledge. But JROS agreed with me on that. If you look at the vast majority of project management books, they basically claim the following thing. We assume you have selected a good idea to implement. Now we will use project management knowledge to deliver these projects on time, on budget, with the required quality, etc., etc., etc. When you look at the portfolio management books domain, portfolio management books tell you, we will teach you how to select the best ideas for your business for implementation. However, we're assuming that you have good project management in place. Sometimes they claim that, sometimes they don't. And for me, once I kind of, as someone who has been practicing project management and portfolio management for quite some time, I said, wait a second, you can't really look at them separately. You have to be looking at them together. And if there is one thing, for listeners to take away on this regarding this book, is that it looks at project management and portfolio management in context of each other and analyzes their influences and interactions with one another. And the book is basically based on 3 very simple promises. That in order to deliver great projects, the company must select the most promising ideas. If you select dumb ideas and you have excellent implementation, you're still not going to end up with good products or services.
Okay, yes.
In order to deliver great projects, the company must ensure that the number of projects does not exceed its throughput capacity. One of the examples I teach at the British Columbia Institute of Technology here in Vancouver. And one of the examples I like to use with my students, I say, well, you just wrote the midterm exam with 5 questions for 2 hours. What happens if, something goes wrong with my head and I give you 100 questions on the final exam? For the same time limit. Well, students go, well, we're all going to fail. Go, okay, that sounds like a silly example. And I sometimes use it with my corporate clients. And they go, well, yeah, that does sound like a silly example. I go, okay, replace the word questions with the word projects and the word exam with the word fiscal year. And they go at me and they go, and suddenly you see the smiles disappearing from their faces because, yeah, indeed, in real life, they try to cram as many projects as possible,
Yes,
the
that's usually
premise,
the case.
the third premise, which should be straightforward, again, with the listeners, hopefully, that in order to deliver great projects, you have to have discipline of scoping, estimation, and other project management techniques in order to deliver these great ideas. This is the main. These points are probably the main points of the book. On a kind of side note, it's written in a fairly informal and non-academic language. Because I want everyone who reads that book really to understand what's going on there. I use this technique where I start each chapter with a historical vignette, which doesn't kind of, when I tell you, it's the, for example, the Virgin Lands project undertaken in Soviet Union in 1953, the German invasion of Soviet Union in 41, Battle of Crécy, et cetera, a whole bunch of historical examples analyzed from the project management perspective. And they act as an introduction into each chapter. So that's, in a nutshell, what makes the book unique. Hopefully I was able to answer that question for you.
Absolutely. All right, so we want to now move on and focus really on project portfolio management for the rest of our discussion here. So how can the listener determine whether they need project portfolio management or not?
You know what? It's an interesting question, and I usually start all of my portfolio management presentations in this way. I say, well, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you 10 traits, so to speak, or science of a company that is in their need of project portfolio management. And I, and I know this is kind of one-way communication with the listeners, but I urge them as I read through these 10 science, start bending your fingers if you think this is applicable to the organization you're currently working for. So with your permission, these 10 signs are: number 1, project and resource managers often fight over resources. Priorities of projects frequently change with resources reassigned. It's kind of do this, no, I changed my mind, do this. Senior managers have authority to unilaterally approve and release projects. Projects are started as soon as approved by senior managers in respective of the resource availability. Senior managers frequently complain about how long the projects take and how much they cost. Even if the strategic idea is implemented, the company sometimes does not achieve the expected improvement. There is no comprehensive document or portfolio that links all of the organizational projects to the strategic plan, which basically means, in other words, wouldn't it be really if we could do this? Wouldn't it be really cool if we could do this? And the project gets started. There is a significant turnover at the senior management level. Strategic plan is presented as a list of initiatives. The cost-effect logic tying those initiatives to the goals of the organization is absent. The list of initiatives, aka projects, is not prioritized. Therefore, it is assumed that all ideas should be implemented simultaneously. Typically, when I present it to groups of professionals, senior managers at companies around the world, average, I get 7 yeses.
Yeah, that's about what I had right now here, and some of them are really funny. I mean, funny in a Dilbert sense of the word funny, because you think, oh yeah, that's my company. Oh yeah, that's my company. This is the way we do things. So yeah, I can fully follow. I can fully follow these 10.
Again, sometimes I get 8, sometimes I get 9, but the historic average is a 7.
7. All right. So now we know when we need project portfolio management. Let's go for a definition here. What is project portfolio management?
My favorite, I mean, there are quite a few definitions out there. My favorite one, again, with your permission, I'm going to give you a definition, and then I'm going to share a very short discussion I once had with the CEO of a company, which would illustrate that point. The formal definition is the science and the art of selecting the best or optimal project mix for the organization subject to known internal and external constraints. Having said that, a couple of years ago, I was teaching a project management seminar, which was attended by a couple of very senior executives. And during the break, one of them pulled me over and goes, listen, I really get this project management stuff, but really what keeps me up at night, or the topics that keep me up at night, are slightly different. I go, well, what are they? He goes, and I quote directly, he goes, my department heads keep whining about the fact that they need more people and more resources to accomplish all of our projects. And I have a bit of an issue with that stance, since I don't know whether, one, they're lying to me, and I just have to continue pressuring them to be more efficient and creative, kind of, roll up your sleeves and work harder approach, or they're telling the truth. And I have to either A, provide them with additional resources, or cut some projects. If I decide to provide them with additional resources, how do I go to the board of directors and justify to them these additional expenditures? If I decide to cut some projects, which project should I kill? So these are the questions that portfolio management answers. And excellent. I suspect that many of the listeners, have those problems. If I was talk to the CEOs, the presidents of the companies where they work, they will have the same problem.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I don't think I've heard project portfolio management explained in such a succinct way, so that everybody can follow and understand immediately, okay, this is what it's all about. Usually hear very academic descriptions of what it's supposed to be doing. Yeah. All right. When we prepared our discussion here, you said, at this point of our discussion, it would be great if we could talk about the main ingredients of project portfolio management. And you mentioned that there were three. So let's go through them. And I'll give them to you, and you can run with them and explain to us what these three ingredients are. So the first ingredient, what is the portfolio value, and how does one measure it?
Well, the simplest way of looking at value, although not necessarily the most correct one, is to think in terms of financial reward, net present value, internal rate of return, return on investment kind of thing. Having said that, a more sophisticated company and the better approach to think would be to look at several variables at the same time, use scoring models. For example, a product company, when deciding should we invest into product A or product B, as an idea, would typically, and again, this will differ from company to company, and it's one of those cases where it's very unique for organization. We might look, for example, at product or competitive advantage, market attractiveness of the proposed product, leverage of core competencies, technical feasibility, and financial reward. On the other hand, for example, I've recently done this exercise at a university one of the universities in North America, and they told me, no, our variables are slightly different. We're looking at strategic fit. We're looking at resources required. We're looking at technical feasibility of the project, i.e., can we do it? We're looking at the financial value, but not from the point of view of return on investment, but probably from the point of view of cost. And we're looking at risk. So this is value. Again, this is one of those most unique aspects, because even like if you look at what's value for Apple versus what's value for the city of Los Angeles, you can probably appreciate, as most of the listeners, they will have completely different set of variables.
Oh, absolutely.
In that particular.
Yeah.
So that's value.
Okay.
Explained in 2 minutes.
Ingredient number 2, I think we're heading towards the mix that you mentioned earlier, right? Why is portfolio balance important?
Well, portfolio balance, I will give you the definition, well, not the explanation, and then I will again share an example of a very interesting conversation I had with you, with one of my clients in Middle East. Balance typically represented in bubble charts, but you can use other means too. Typically, they look at what percentage of my business or what percentage of my projects do I have in the high risk, high reward projects versus low risk, low margin ventures. And I remember presenting this particular module in Dubai recently when I was teaching this course. And there was a gentleman from Saudi Arabia who was the CEO and the president and the owner of a very large construction company there. And at the beginning of the balance discussion, he goes to me, well, you know what? I don't really care about the balance part. I go, why not? He goes, well, I'm kind of like a professional services company, right? People come to me and say, build me this. I'm not going to say no. Hence, I cannot turn them down. Hence, this entire balance thing is irrelevant to me. And then towards the end of the discussion, which takes about 1.5 to 2 hours on balance, he goes, wait a second. He goes, most of my business is coming from, local oil company. And and he described it as fairly boring projects. We build kind of, box type of buildings. There's nothing exciting happening. They're low margin, but they're the cash cow of my business. They provide me with money. He goes, having said that, the interesting thing is that hotel where we're at was not far away from Burj Khalifa, which is one of the tallest buildings in the world. That looks very attractive, very sexy. And he goes, I do want some of my projects to be Burj Khalifa type of projects. He goes, maybe not the real Burj Khalifa types of projects, but baby Burj Khalifas. That's the language he used. He goes, yeah, I want some of my portfolio to be in high risk, high reward things. He goes, not 80%, not 50%, probably around 10% for starts. So he goes, yeah, at the end of the conversation, he goes, yeah, you know what? This is interesting. This is something that would be valuable for my business.
Makes sense.
So that's kind of in a nutshell, yeah, the balanced portfolio thing.
Right. And lastly, the third ingredient, the third main ingredient to project portfolio management. Here we're now getting into the corporate strategy. And the question here is, what is strategic alignment?
Well, strategic alignment, the quick way of explaining, the formal way of explaining that will be, tracing all of the projects to the mission statement of the company. The simple way of explaining that is that if I look at the list of your projects, your company projects, and I'm talking to the CEO of your company, and I pick one of the projects and say, why are you doing this? There will be a very clear explanation of why this project is undertaken. Again, let's use an example, slightly silly one, I warn you. If my company's strategy is we're going to go after Asian markets, and as a result, I have 3 projects. One is to sign a partnership deal in Japan, acquire a company in China, and open a branch in Brussels. Which one is the odd one out?
I think Brussels might be a bit wrong.
Because last time we checked, it was in Europe.
Yes.
And again, I'm sure it never happens at listeners' organizations, but there's a thing known as executive pet project. The strategic alignment is exact test for that. And I have seen in my experience, I have seen portfolios consisting, 50, 60, sometimes 70%, consisting of projects that started with, wouldn't it be really cool if we could do this? And they cannot be traced back to the strategy of the company.
Right.
So
that happens more often than not. Right.
Oh yeah, that happens quite a lot. Again, I've seen some companies where 70% of their portfolio cannot be strategically aligned. They can't explain to me why they're doing these projects.
Right. And we also have to admit that there are some projects that do not have a strategic alignment, but at least you can trace them back to some regulatory requirement, right? It may not be strategically important for the company, but because we have a regulatory requirement, we still have to do this, even though purely from a strategy, would much rather not do this.
Yes.
Cool. All right. So we've looked at portfolio management, explanation of it. We looked at the 3 main ingredients. And even though we're far beyond this now, let me go back and ask you a very basic question here. What are the differences between project management and portfolio management, just to hammer the point home?
Actually, it's a very good question because there's still a lot of confusion, even among the PMPs, let alone executives. Well, the following things that I'm about to read out to you are beyond the domain of project management. It kind of, once you go through them, and it kind of looks obvious, but in conversations with the executives, very frequently they assume that project managers will take on these tasks. Some of them: identifying opportunities and needs for projects, selecting which projects to be undertaken and which projects are to be killed or terminated, establishing project priorities in terms of project A is more important than project B, projecting revenues and effect on cash flow, aligning projects with strategic objectives, evaluating the value of projects, looking at benefits versus risks of undertaking project A, undertaking project B, balancing different types of projects. These are not things that are done by project managers. Yes, some people sometimes when I read, show this slide to people come back to me and go, well, they should be getting feedback from project. Yes, they should be. The executives, they should be getting feedback from project managers on all these topics. But you cannot, having a business model where you say, well, all of these things will be left to project managers is not a viable business model.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that would be the difference between PM and PPM.
Okay, it's just beyond what project managers normally do in that area. Excellent. Now, let me throw another dimension on top of that. How does program management play into all of this?
Well, if you look at the definition of program management is defined as the process of managing several related projects. So, and although I'm sure there will be some people who will disagree with me, program management is just an extension of project management. So if you have an organization, a big organization, where you have one or more groupings of interrelated, interdependent projects, then program management becomes a layer between project management and project portfolio management. Important to remember, though, that program management still does not address project selection or throughput capacity assessment, which projects to be undertaken and which projects are to be terminated.
Okay. Now, let's take a look at the whole company again, and let's ask, what happens without portfolio management?
Well, a lot of bad things happen. I'm just going to give you the most typical ones. And I'm going to give you the way I present it to you and to the listeners is that I'm going to give you the short term and then the long term result of that. If a company does not have project portfolio management, they would be reluctant to kill projects. If you're reluctant to kill projects or project ideas, all of the project's ideas submitted will be added to the list. Inevitably, right away, you're going to end up with too many projects and resources very thinly spread. When it's kind of, remember that example I gave you with 100 questions instead of 5 questions on the final exam? If your resources are thinly spread, quality will suffer. I joke with people that it's like the law of gravity. As long as you're on planet Earth, this will happen. If you spread your resources too thinly, quality will suffer. Long term, you will have increased time to market, which means severely late, severely over budget, and you will have high failure rates. High failure rates in terms of project delivery, but even if the projects are delivered and turned into products and services, they're not going to be as successful as you expected them to be. Second aspect, if you don't have a rigorous selection process, and again, I'm sure it never happens at the listeners' companies, organizations, projects will get selected on emotion and or politics. When projects are selected on emotion and or politics, you end up selecting a lot of wrong projects. When you select wrong projects, in the long term, they end up in failures. Even though they were, let's look at the situation where they even were delivered on time and on budget, but if this was a bad idea to do in the first place, it will still be a failure. If you don't have a strategic criteria for project selection, your projects will not be strategically aligned. Remember I mentioned that example with Brussels, which sounded kind of like a silly one. You wouldn't believe how many times I have conversations with people, especially on the technology field, and they say, well, we want to be the market leader in research and development, in bringing new products to the company. And then the next question I ask, well, what percentage of your project's portfolio is sitting in R&D? 5%. You really expect to be the market leader with 5% of your project portfolio dedicated to R&D? That's not going to happen. So these are the top 3 things that happen without project portfolio management. For that, for additional list, we can go. Remember that we talked about the how to determine whether you need project portfolio management. Those 10 signs. You can go to those, but these are the 3 main ones.
Excellent. Okay. Closing the interview here, I always like to leave our listeners with some advice from you, our guest. Many of the listeners are straightforward project managers. I do assume we have portfolio and program managers listening in as well, but very likely, we are the project management podcast. So our listeners may not have to deal with portfolio management that often. So for those professionals out there, what are your tips, 2 to 3 tips, recommendations in regards what they can do to ensure that their projects fit into the overall portfolio of the company, into the overall strategy of their company?
I'm going to give you 2 sets of answers. One would be at the tactical level and one would be at the strategic level. At the tactical, and then for the tactical level, I'm going to follow it by a very serious disclaimer, and you will see why in a second. I encourage you, the project manager, to ask questions like when you're assigned to the project. Why are we doing this project? What is the value of this project to our organization? What happens if we don't do this project? You can probably guess what kind of disclaimer will follow up these questions, right? These are very dangerous questions to ask.
Absolutely. You may lose your job over those.
You may lose your job. Hence comes in the strategic level. Strategic level, typically what happens, most of my engagements would start in the following way. Number 1, you have to educate your executives. As we already discussed that it's not the project managers, it's the executives, the senior people at the company who make those decisions. Hence, they have to have an appreciation of what project portfolio management is. Most of them don't know that. Again, based on my experience at least, I can't speak for everyone, but so what typically would happen, have someone come in and do 1-hour presentation at your company about what is project portfolio management, kind of, the topics we discussed with you today. That is typically, it's a good idea to follow that up by a 1-day project portfolio management seminar working session, where the way I do it at my company is that we spend about 50% of the time educating people about project portfolio management and the second 50% trying to derive this project portfolio management algorithm. For example, what variables would be included in the value definition? What is the desired balance of your portfolio? What are the strategic alignment models that you would like to use, etc., etc. And then a report is returned back to the company saying, okay, do you want to do it in future? Whatever you do, please, please, please do not confuse the implementation of project portfolio management and or project management methodology with the implementation of project portfolio management and or PM software. Because I know a lot of companies that say, well, we have an issue with project selection. If only could we implement a software program that will address these issues and all of our problems will go away. They won't.
Yeah, most people who need portfolio management, they already have the software. It's called a piece of paper and a pen.
Exactly. Again, another story I wanted to share with you. A very senior executive of one company I got called in because they had very serious project management problems, let alone portfolio. They weren't even touching the portfolio management. And he goes to me, Jamal, I don't know why we have such issues with our projects. After all, we have Microsoft Project installed on every desktop in the office. I kid you not, that was not. And you better attend my project management course to kind of understand what's going on here and why just installation of project management software on your desktop will address the problem. To kind of sum up this takeaways discussion, I do encourage the listeners to contact me. I don't know if you're going to have my contact information.
Absolutely,
there, but
yes.
If they have any, look me up on LinkedIn. I would be more than happy to connect with them, and I would be more than happy to answer these questions.
Perfect. Once again, the book is called Delivering Exceptional Project Results, a practical guide to project selection, scoping, estimation, and management. It is written by Jamal Mustafayev. It is about 320 pages thick and published by J. Ross Publishing. Jamal, thank you very much for stopping by today, introducing us to your book and that very interesting discussion about project portfolio management.
Thank you, Cornelius. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And that was Jamal Mustafayev on project portfolio management. Remember, we are giving away 2 copies of his book. 1 copy automatically goes to a lucky premium subscriber, and the other one is up for grabs. So stop by at our Facebook fan page, which is facebook.com/PM Podcast, and look for the book giveaway notice to participate. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a PMP or PGMP and you're looking for a simple and effective way to earn your PDUs, then try our sister podcast, the PDU Podcast, and get new webinars and at least 1 PDU every month on autopilot. Stop by at pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this statement here that I think fits nicely into the theme of today's interview. Attempts to get answers early on in a project fail, as there are many more wrong questions than correct questions. Activity during early project stages should therefore be dedicated to finding the correct questions. Once the correct questions have been identified, correct answers will naturally fall out of subsequent work without grief or excitement, and there will be an understanding of what the project is really meant to achieve. Until next time.